Go. And we're picking up with stormwater management.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to hand that straight over to Mr. Miller and Mr. Wright. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't even see you come in the room. Sorry.
That's all right, you're all right.
You can go in the middle and start.
Firstly, quite timely to hear some of the other kōrero around the table today. A lot of it is linked indirectly or directly to the work that Stormwater Working Group is doing at the moment as part of the tank process. For example, the presentation by Napier City Council around their aspirations for the Ahuriri estuary and their stormwater plans has been picked up by the Stormwater Working Group, and we're looking at incorporating that into our rules framework. So it's quite timely to hear some of those discussions today. So moving through my paper, I guess what I really want to impress is that the process for improving the stormwater rules and policies framework, there is 2 or 3 main I guess work streams that I'm sort of pushing through at the moment. The first belongs to the actual working group that sits under tank, and that's made up of some very passionate people from tangata whenua, DHB, TLAs, Forest and Bird, and regional council staff, and that group's really been tasked at looking at some of the issues and coming back with some proposals for fixing those issues. We've met on a handful of occasions. We went out for a field trip and we looked at some of the hotspots around the region, and as a result of that platform that the working group has set, I was then able to pick that up and move it into a more, I guess, technical practitioner level, working with the likes of Craig Thu, who was here before, and Jason Strong and Richard Muniki from Napier City Council, and bringing it into that, right, we all know there's a problem, but what are we actually going to do about it? What is practical? And looking at some of even the high-level costings around that. So that's kind of what myself and Marianne Baker, who is another senior planner here at Council, and that's what we're doing at the moment. We're holding a series of workshops and meetings with those TLA staff, and we're thrashing around some potential draft rules and policies. For example, we're looking at things around targeting new development and infrastructure, and focusing on this new movement in stormwater treatment around retention and detention of stormwater. We're looking at better source control. We're looking at making sure we're consistent in our approach between regional council, the TLAs, with rules, services, standards, that kind of stuff. And some sort of broad observations I would make is that there is a lot of goodwill there, and there is a real sense that something has to change, and the attitude has changed in terms of stormwater is a priority and it can't be sort of shoved to the back of the list of issues. It is something that needs, urgent attention now. So that's really promising, and I think it stands us in good stead to come back to the tank group with some draft rules and objectives for them to discuss. So in terms of timeframes, we would optimistically have an outline maybe end of this year, start of next year, for the tank group to sort of give feedback on. The other thing I would say, and I alluded to this at the outset, was that there are heaps of projects in the region at the moment that have impacts for stormwater. I've already mentioned the Ahuriri Master Plan. Anna spoke briefly about the hotspot funding. We've got Mana Ahuriri and their aspirations for the estuary. So part of the challenge for me is to make sure that nothing that the tank group is doing is going to contradict any of that work, and to keep getting those main players to our table as well. So that's really important for this bit of work. That's kind of a potted summary of what we're doing. I'm happy to take questions and comments.
Councillor Bailey.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm looking at the table, page 76, the third line down, the cross-country drain. Where does it actually discharge into?
Discharges into the Pacific Ocean, just
Okay, so
just near the boundary.
Yep.
With the old, well, what we used to call the boundary.
Okay, wasn't entirely sure of that. So there's a number of these non-compliant consents that, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but tank doesn't cover the discharges into the coastal area?
No, it's mainly focused around the urban environment, but it does cover the Ahuriri estuary and the Waitangi Lagoon.
Well, discharging into the Pacific Ocean is not discharging into the Ahuriri estuary, is it?
Well, no.
So,
Yep.
so these are not consents. These are consents which are non-compliant, which aren't covered by Tank Group.
Yeah.
But are you confident that Napier City Council is taking them seriously to deal with these issues?
Well, I can't speak on behalf of Napier City Council.
Look, I'll reply. Look,
Yeah.
I've had a discussion with Wayne about this, about this table. These are what he would call technical non-compliance. In other words, they haven't submitted their records on time. And earlier on, when they were here and Jason was sitting down the back and he answered a question about getting their consents in on time, there's been a little bit of adjustment of practice that we've had to encourage them to improve, and they are responding. So this is really a technical non-compliance. They haven't provided the information in the time that they're required to do. So we've followed up with them on that.
You're referring to all these shaded ones?
The shaded.
Yes, yeah.
Chair, can I
Yeah,
just
the
add
yellow ones.
that Liz and I and Graham Hanson are meeting with Wayne Jack and his senior management on Monday to discuss the ongoing issues around the management of stormwater between the two organisations. So we've elevated it to that level and we're progressing those conversations.
Yeah, that's cool. That's what I was after. Was something's been done. So
Could you explain to him that Councillor Curtin was, a little on something in terms of his comments earlier in the day? Anyway, Councillor Curtin.
How can I resist? Yes, a couple of issues. You may be aware that love has really broken out, but there's tough love too. And in this particular regard, we need tough love. And I'm just wanting to know, I'm looking at your table here and current status, the middle column, and I don't know whether where we stand, particularly with those Hastings, are they compliant or non-compliant?
Yes, so just to explain that further, you'll probably recall the last version of the spreadsheet which I presented last meeting, because they had a lot of them non-compliant. And once again, what I found with that was that, again, they were all of this technical non-compliance, and I actually found that just by writing up non-compliant or compliant, it wasn't actually adding much to the conversation. So what I endeavoured to do here was to explain a little bit further as to what it was. And the answer, in short, to your question is that a lot of these, they are still non-compliant, but the second part of that is that we actually have sat down with them on a number of occasions.
Yeah, I hear all that.
Yeah, to work through all that. Yeah.
I hear all that, but you've got two narrations in your table.
Yep.
One is you're sitting down and holding hands with these guys, and the other one is non-compliant or near compliant or whatever, now compliant.
Yes.
So can we have, even if we have two columns there saying technical non-compliance or significant non-compliance, but whatever it is, in Richard Manicki's commentary, being honest is the best thing that we can do before to make progress. If it's not compliant, it's not compliant.
Well, we did report they were not compliant last
Okay, but
time.
what,
so
you're not telling me anything here.
I don't know how us writing non-compliant or compliant in relation to Hastings now is actually going to change the situation because it's...
Well, are they
when-
compliant or not?
No, but in saying that, the difference between them before and now is that they're actually sitting down and talking with us and actually working on their new consent, which is going to be better for all concerned, where they'll become compliant. Now, where you compare that to others who are non-compliant,
Yeah,
we
I hear-
actually
I
haven't
hear
been
you.
to that, we haven't actually got to that situation.
I
where
really
they've
hear
actually
you
been
on that,
helping.
but
Yep.
I'm not buying it for one moment. Can I get a report from you which says it is compliant or not compliant? I
So
don't-
what we'll do, councillor, is we will amend this attachment, add in another column, and call it compliance status or something along those lines, and email that out to you.
Well, just put it in reports, it's fine.
Well, I would have thought this is a third report in 3 meetings. Did you expect a...
I just need
Yeah.
each time the same issue arises and we haven't quite got there yet. I know what you're doing, I appreciate the
Okay.
dialogue that's going on and we're trying to work collaboratively, but we still at the end of the day need to know if it's compliant or not.
Yep, sure.
Any other questions, comments? Is that all we are being asked to do here?
Yes.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Wilson, thank you. All those in favor, any further comment? Councillor Bailey, you happy? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Thank you. All right. Now a series of any particular order you want to do these in, Graham, or stick with the agenda? So we're on agenda item 14, Whakatu, weed and sediment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to introduce Ant and Steve, they're here for the next 3 papers, and fortunately the graveyard shifted again a bit, but so we'll step through these 3 papers with Ant leading the Whakatu related paper.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm pretty confident I'll be brief here. So I'm representing a project team of 12 people, 5 of those from Kōpāriki Marae and the rest regional council staff. Excuse me. So apologies, the rest of the team couldn't make it, but they were reluctant to commit an unknown amount of time today. So they wanted me to come and just give you a brief update on that. The project that many of you will be familiar with from 11th of May last year, 2016. There was a meeting held at Kōpāriki Marae. I appreciate some of you might not know anything about that, so another good point for the update today. So that meeting involved the Environment and Services Committee accepting a report on enhancement for Matatini, the Matatini Festival held in February this year, 2017, and agreed to staff working in partnership with Kōpāriki and to continue investigations to assess options for reducing the impact of seasonal aquatic weed growth and sedimentation adjacent to Kōpāriki. So this is a small section, 600 metres, where we undertook a trial in this, removing weed and sediment. And the trial was programmed so that it would improve the state of the awa at the time of Matatini. So they were expecting manuhere, and there were some other events around that, which I know some of you attended. The opening of the po, Te Papa o Tānea Nuirangi, the Ruru po down at Whakatu there by the wool scourers. So that was opened in end of February this year. And the project also involves sediment mapping. So over that section we ran some cross sections. So we've got some good data about the volumes of sediment through that section and the characteristics of that gravel substrate. We analysed some of that substrate, so we've got some reports on the contaminants and nutrients, the composition of the sediment in that section. And we also did monitoring of macroinvertebrates and the Pātiki monitoring, the black flounder that's strong in the hearts to the core Pātiki people. And a lot of that monitoring involved bringing in local groups. So Clive School was heavily involved, EIT came in, and it was a great opportunity to for the community, I guess, to become more aware of these issues. Sort of the downstream end of the topics you've been discussing today with the stormwater issues and things. Then in December, we actually undertook to remove sediment. So we originally had a company at that meeting called Southwater Dredging that was going to come up from Canterbury and do some work with a floating barge and sort of an auger suction dredge. They didn't turn up for a couple of reasons, so we looked at forced to consider alternative options, and they were Davies Water Solutions. So they had a new pump truck, basically. This they call it a recycling unit, where they can, and a modified suction footing, like a big vacuum cleaner, basically, into the truck. We created some settlement areas down there adjacent to the marae, and that wasn't so successful, but you often got jammed up with weed and things, and had a digger, a long reach digger operating from the edge of the bank, reaching out about 10 metres and scraping, so that moved about 500 cubes of sediment into and trucked it into those sediment areas. So yeah, I guess the important part of the project was that collaboration with core Pātiki representatives there. Project expenditure 35,000. We were budgeted 44, but yeah, those alternative methods meant we rescheduled that. And the outcomes, so there's a draft report that I've been working on that needs to go through a few more hands before it's available for release, but that'll be available with all that data that I've been talking about, and some more outcomes and direction. So that's covered my points.
Councillor Graham.
Thanks, Anthony. So we did it for political reasons. We were a little bit doubtful. What was the impact? Did it have an immediate impact, and is it back to what as it is today? Just yes, no. I don't know, long dissertation.
Yes and no. Sorry. Yeah, it was great to get the benefits to the community in terms of getting that result where we extract the sediment not only down to the gravel substrate, but it's try to get the sediment out of the substrate to create that ecosystem. Didn't work. But as you probably know, you were there on the day, and the Waka was enabled to come up for the opening of the Po through
and that
Tini and the
was
other
due to that
events.
dredging the Waka, otherwise wouldn't have got there.
Well, it's really just the state of the awa that we've tried to improve on. It kind of varies. So and during winter it's often good, but there was definitely a concern that at February the state of the awa wouldn't be good, and I think people were pretty happy with it. Brought a lot of attention to that area as well, and the riparian planting that's been done, which covers about 2.5 kilometres now around core Pātiki. So,
But it's back. The river's back to.
Well, we'd like to get in again in summer. The levels have been too high to monitor since April, since Cyclone Cook came through. But it's highly likely. The weed grew back within 6 weeks. Sediment, I'm not sure about the rate of accumulation for sediment accumulation, sorry.
So why would we go back?
Your mates.
Yeah, well, we need to look at options here, what we want to achieve, and I'd be expecting that technology needs to change before we go back. We need to really look at our systems, and people are working on that around the country. There are people having these same issues with sedimentation and working on solutions, but I don't.
But this is not a long-term solution, never was, and was always short-term.
Perhaps I can assistant comment there, Mr. Chairman, that this has sort of been usurped into a wider issue that we're looking at in sediment, which is part of the tank process that Gary Clode's involved in, and also a secondary or significant issue is the Clyde River dredging at the lower section of the river that we've brought to you on 2 occasions so far. So some of the work that's been done, particularly around material quality and sediments and heavy metals, will be helpful in that. But it works, so it's not, I hesitate to use the word wasted, but it's evidence that in fact the materials that were in the base of the river aren't as contaminated as we thought.
We've got some intellectual property out of it.
Yeah, we have.
Bit
So,
like
so the
Rutaniffa.
issue about whether we need to go to land-based or sea is an
Bit
option.
like Rutaniffa, but cheaper.
Oh, I'd like to think it's probably a bit of an unfair comparison, but the challenge is the state of the entire river as opposed to, and again, not denigrating what's been done here, it was certainly a localised impact for Kuhupāriki and Matatini. So some of the findings are certainly localised and small scale, but are relevant to what we're doing with the tank process and the Clyde River dredging.
Right. Councillor Bailey?
Thank you, Chair. I just you mentioned that you weren't too sure yet whether how quickly the sedimentation's come back, whether it's fully back yet. It was just a pity. I was just thinking it would be interesting if we kept on dredging it all out and just made a big mountain of it and said, come and get what's yours. Take it back as a visualisation of just how much bloody sediment there is in the rivers.
Again, happy to comment about that. The comment was from Steve that the sediment in fact came back at short notice or short period once it was removed. That doesn't surprise me at all because in fact the sediment base is from the mouth of the Clyde River or the Onara up to the Raupari. The challenge we would have, and that was the comment I made in respect to this project, is we need to take a large volume or a large source of the material out because all it would be doing is actually shifting around within close proximity to where it is. So if it simply shifted from 100 metres upstream, well, what have we learned?
We should create ourselves a mountain of it so people can see just how much is in there.
Well, in fact, and arguably that's what we'll do with the Clyde River dredging. But again, that's complicated by our belief and strong belief that in fact that's sediments that come back up the system as opposed to what we were doing in the upper section of the Kuhupāriki is what comes down through the Karama and Raupari, which are relatively clean. So the issue is still, there's still some benefits in determining whether it's can be cleaned up and restored as opposed to perhaps what was found out from a small scale effort.
It is pretty striking footage that the sediment that came out 500 cubic metres in a sediment area paddock, but that mapping showed that there was 2,500, so we got out 20% of the trial area over 200 metres, so there's a lot there. So you're right, you could do a mountain.
So it remains on the tank radar. May I have a motion to accept the report? Councillor Graham, seconded by Councillor Wilson. All those in favour? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
It's down there.
River Berms.
Yeah, thank Mr. Chairman. The next one is going to be introduced and spoken to by Steve, the Management of Public Use of River Berms.
Kia ora koutou, good afternoon. The purpose of this paper is a update on the investigation into management of public use of our river berm. It was initially presented in December last year, 2016. Just like to remind you that the investigation is seeking to understand and or respond to perceived declining community tolerance over some river berm activities, such as berm grazing, increasing community expectations as berm land has become more accessible and visible through the creation of cycleways and developments such as our expressways to the general public, pressures on scheme land area to accommodate new activities and infrastructure while providing for existing activities, inappropriate public use activities such as rubbish dumping and inappropriate vehicle use such as hooning, donuts and the likes, and the need for a consistent and coordinated approach to public use management on our river berms, and sort of relating what we've done with our regional parks in terms of managing recreation, and then the door was opened up through that regional park network plan to then look at recreational activity in the context of that plan on our river berms. So this investigation is also seeking to achieve that. So where have we got to date? There are 3 areas of work program, the first of which was to complete a full and detailed inventory of public use on our river berms, and we're talking about the Hiratonga Plain Flood Control and Drainage Scheme berm area presently. That work is nearing completion, it's about 95% complete, and it's documented everything that's going on within the river berms and where, such as game bird shooting, radio control aeroplanes, where people are getting access to the rivers. It's confirmed key public use issues that we've had in our minds. For example, we're talking about, mentioned wanting to look at alternatives to berm grazing as a maintenance tool on our river berms, but is the issue the berm grazing on the river berms or cattle getting in the waterways? And certainly cattle getting in the waterways is the problem, and through the inventory we've identified where that's mainly occurring. For example, on the Ngāroa at Chesterhope, downstream of Red Bridge from Havelock, which is actually just above the stream. Cattle tend to, not so frequently, but where they are sited in our rivers on the Hiratonga Plains, that's a common area. And it's also confirmed issues such as rubbish dumping, motor vehicle access, undesirable access, public use and activity, conflict and competing values. So with that inventory nearly complete, via consultants, we are drafting a report and consultancy document to consult with our regional community on this investigation. And further, we are using a reach of the Ngāroa, the right bank of the Ngāroa from Fernhill to Awatoto as a pilot area to do a case study on. And that's driven because the grazier of that reach, it's about 90 hectares in total, has relinquished his grazing lease. So it sort of forced the issue with us to figure out how we're going to maintain that area in the absence of grazing on that berm. And to do that, we're looking to define the area in different amenity levels where we have different levels of service applied. So for example, we might have a reach between the Chesterhope Bridge and the Expressway Bridge. That might be a high amenity area, and so we'd manage that berm area similar to how we'd manage a regional park. And then in a lower amenity area, we wouldn't have such a high level of service. It's probably more out of sight from the general public, and so lower standards. So this is just there's the ideas that we're putting together at the moment. And also just like to mention that a similar approach is being taken with a section of the Tukituki River berm near Waipukurau in response to increasing inquiry and complaints regarding competing public use activity in that area. And in terms of the alternatives to berm grazing, we're considering operations such as commercial cropping, cut and carry crops, more extensive mowing, the use of low mow grass species, do nothing. What happens if we do nothing and just let the grasswood grow? How's that going to affect our capacity of the river berm or river channel to convey water? Is forestry an option, and conversion to parkland? And options being considered for managing public use expectation and impacts on recreational use that we're investigating include defining those usage areas, as well as restricting vehicle access, increasing resource provision for policing, security patrols, and also reviewing legislative requirements about how we, dare I say, can enforce inappropriate activities such as rubbish dumping, for example, better than we can do presently. And through the course of this investigation, we are very mindful that the primary purpose of the Hiratonga Flood Control and Drainage Scheme is to convey water and protect our community, flood water especially. And so going forward, we are expecting to have the draft report completed in November of this year. And there is the update. Happy to take questions.
Councillor Wilson.
Very quickly, Chair, this report, when it comes out, will it also have a, based on usage, different values, will it also have a financial component to, a slight loss of money, slightly positive grazing money versus hugely expensive mowing costs?
Yes.
And then is there a way to try and weave that into, the usage, the types of usage, the amenity value, all that stuff? I'm interested to see how you do this, because I think that's a key part of the conversation.
Yes, thank you for those comments, and absolutely. So as part of the analysis for the alternative methodologies is understanding what those cost implications are, or revenue, should it be something that, like a commercial crop, that turns a revenue. But for example, if mowing is a regime, we know that we're looking at $300 a hectare. If we're to mow all the available area, we're looking at a minimum cost of around $300,000 a year versus currently we have an income of around about $50,000. So short answer, yes, we will be doing that analysis. No, it's for approximately 1,000 hectares of river berm. So it's the area we're dealing with is the berm land within the Hiratonga Plains Flood Control and Drainage Scheme. So it's from stop bank toe, outward toe of the stop bank to outward toe of the opposite stop bank, and the berm land therein that is managed by the Regional Council.
So just to put a little bit of context around that for the here and now, the loss of grazing on the right bank is around $20,000 associated with just the area that we've closed of recent times, and the mowing of the stop banks, which is something we feel compelled to do because that's the important aspect, and I suppose in a order of priority of significance, looking after the stop banks is rated the highest, so we'll be mowing those, which is another $60,000. So we're already looking at an $80,000 turnaround. The challenge we have, or I have, is considering the implications of this in an LTP context, because the costs are real and they're hitting us in terms of what is going to be a trial period for 12 months, but obviously the wider ramifications are not insignificant. So that's the challenge in front of us.
Any other comments? Have we move it?
I have a couple of questions, Chair, if you wouldn't mind.
Would you like to discuss forestry at Tira this afternoon also?
Very quickly.
Okay.
Very quickly. Given the benefits to tourism of having the river berms being well maintained, because that's, as you say, it's a big part of it, have we looked at alternative funding from, I don't know, Tourism New Zealand or from central government or anything to help with maintenance of those sort of things? Question number one.
I haven't, not yet.
I'm also involved in the Cycleway project at the moment while we attempt to solve a couple of problems here, and it's certainly an ongoing discussion around I suppose the less than tangible opportunities we get out of the Cycleway network and the opportunity to support, sort of physical infrastructure or assets of ours. Yeah. Acknowledging there's a wider, benefit associated with tourism. We don't see any direct impact or opportunity of that. So while we have the assets on, the Cycleway assets on the flood control assets, we have the challenges of providing and maintaining the standards, but we don't get income associated with offsetting costs within the schemes.
Cool. No, thanks.
At the moment, but it's something that is a discussion that we've had a few times around those organisations prospering out of the cycle network. Should there be something more tangible?
We could put a value on that and trade it for our cash contribution.
Well, I was going to suggest that, Chair.
And I don't disagree with that sentiment.
And just the other thing was just a comment, and just to say that Steve, when I read the words vertical hooning, it just took me back to my 20s, and I just thought, shit, that was so cool. Go put a smile on my face on a Friday night. Thank you very much.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Would you care to second that now? We have I think Fenton moved it. Second from Councillor Bailey. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Nope. All right, forestry at Tutira.
I can run.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So Steve was equally going to step through this one.
Can we take it as largely read or and stick to the issues?
I'm okay with that.
If I could just make a comment, Chair, that I've been most impressed with the process that's been used to go through to get to this point. I've been involved with the meeting and the field trip that we took, and it was thoroughly enjoyed being involved with that process.
I mean, my general takeaway from this was that all the various parties are still, at least at the moment, happy with one another.
So that's at the crux of it, is that there's a working group together made up of interested parties. We've just completed our second workshop, and as Councillor Bailey has mentioned, we've had a field trip. It's a couple of the members of the working group are a little bit frustrated with the process right at this point, and using a multiple criteria analysis. They feel it's maybe a little bit overly complicated, but given the interest, the profile and the range of values that we're needing to consider, I think it's confident it's the appropriate methodology to take this through to a decision.
So when you come back in November, would you expect this to be a controversial matter, or?
I'm very much hoping not, but
You ready to move it? Okay. Councillor Graham seconds. Any other discussion, questions? All those in favor? Aye. Passed. Thank you.
thank you.
Operational activities is more or less open to you all. If anybody has flagged anything they have a question about, this is supposed to be our early alert system for things in the pipeline that may cause heartburn of one sort or another. And if no one has any, we'll simply accept the report. No comments? Okay. All right. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? None? Accepted. And that brings us to new items. What do we have by way of?
We only have one now, Tom, because
We've been whittled them down a bit. Matariki?
Matariki. I forgot that we're still on video, and I don't want to launder too much dirty laundry in the public, but suffice to say, there's been some vigorous discussions on the governance structure of Matariki, and it all stems from the fact that this was a very poor process from the beginning, and our council and our councillors were not embraced in the process. And so there's still a lot of angst around it. There's been a lot of discussion on how we should go forward, and it's always been my view that the only way that that this will work, and it's really important that this works because it's the only vehicle that we all sit together as a post-amalgamation body talking about economic development and employment and social issues in our region. So I do think it's really important. But it has been captured by chief executives, and I've always been really unhappy about that. And I firmly believe that the only way this will work is that the governors of this region manage the governance of it. So in the last 2 weeks, there has been some major changes because one group of tenant whenua approached a group that has been closely working with the existing governance body, approached them and said we want a 50-50 tenant whenua, other fellas, including everyone else, 50%, which is of course not acceptable to anybody else around the table, and more to the point, brings to the fore the ability for us all to be able to debate this issue once again, because if one party can debate it, others can. Secondly, the Mayor of Wairoa was emphatic and has a resolution passed in his council that if the Mayor, not him, but if the Mayor of Wairoa is not involved at a governance level, Wairoa would not participate. So, considering that, and considering my own prejudices, which are strong, we've put a proposition to the existing Matariki people that the governance is taken over by, it's approximately, this is a bit of toing and froing, the 5 regional leaders, 5 tenant whenua to equal that off, 1 being the chair of Niki, 5 others, it's coming down to this today, 5 others from business. We are very focused on that the original 10 picked the business. We don't want, we want business leaders there, and we are talking, people who are really high profile, who can contribute, so serious players. One of the business being the chair of the DHB, not the chief executive of the DHB. I'm sick of chief executives thinking they run the place. The chair of the DHB. So there are 2 fixed people there. There are quite a few fixed people there. There's the mayors and the chair of regional council, and there are tenant whenua and the chair of the iwi of Niki, and it's our proposition that the existing chair of Niki become the chair of this governance body. Now, I know some of you will think that I'm only saying this because he's a mate of mine, but the fact of the matter is, he's probably the highest profile person in the Bay at the moment. And you need to have people of his calibre leading us if we're going to go forward together. And you can't have them outside the tent. So we need to target, and it comes down to all those things that we've talked about before. Unless you've got the right people in the right place, won't work. So this thing has floundered. That young Cuban girl that was in the Napier delegation today, she said, "I just can't believe that nothing happens with Matariki." Well, this is the reason nothing happens with Matariki. So our proposition is that we have a governance board, meets quarterly, only deals with the high-end issues, and the management group, which is essentially what the board is today, they deal with the day-to-day things. And that's where the chief executives are. So that's my proposition on the table, and it's going round the traps at the moment. It's got support from some areas, but it isn't over the line yet. But I'm pretty determined. We've already agreed, Neil, that we are funding it, and that's one of the big issues, that councils, and see that you're completely out of the loop, and that's what part of the problem here. We've been just kept out of the loop of this. Now, I don't think deliberately, and James has done his best, and I'm not trying to downgrade his huge efforts in here, but there are rules in the way things happen, and Hawke's Bay needs to abide by those rules, and that is that governors govern. And we are funding, all the councils are funding this, and we've got a bunch of other people telling us how we're running it. Finish the day off for us?
Is that you, Pat? Mine is very tame by comparison. I just had gotten around to reading the Regional Transport Committee meeting and noticed that there was a public report from the port saying that local water bottling plants had moved 7 containers from Hastings and 15 containers from Awatoto to the port in the last 6 weeks with no strain on the network yet. And I'd been under the impression that water bottling in Hawke's Bay was dead. So I'm wondering whether we can get a actual quasi-regular report on how much water is being exported.
Yeah, so, well, look,
I mean, it seems to be a matter of public record as far as.
in terms of it being reporting on volumes being exported, we can talk to the port about getting that. What we can provide more easily to you is the telemated water use of the consents of the water bottlers in the region, and we can provide that information very readily.
Cool. All right. Great. That winds up our business for the afternoon. Thank you.
I've heard that people putting water in apples and exporting them. Outrageous.